Yeah, that's a good point, and I didn't, is that we do have to update the land use maps, and we do have to update the data, and the data will be then taken and put online so people can see it and be updated on a very frequent basis. And the land use maps are real important, as Jerry talked about, because those are what are used to determine zoning and other types of things. So I think that that's a good point, and we have to go and update that after we get this done. So it's a long journey.
Well, and just throwing it out there, this is my overused, almost hackneyed phrase, but to me, land use planning is like skeet shooting. You have to continually adjust the aim in order to hit the mark. And so there's always something to be working on.
Okay, who else would like to speak?
I'd like to thank all of you commissioners for the obvious effort that's represented here, and I recognize that to a substantial extent this is, I think, intended to be an aspirational document rather than a matter of law. I wanted to encourage you to consider in your further review the way that the word appropriate has been used through the document. I sort of felt as though it was a red flag for ambiguity, and would encourage you to, I understand the challenges that you face in your efforts, but it appears a lot, and it always seems as though, you could kind of substitute, do the best you can at the beginning of the whole thing. I think I would also encourage that there be recognition of the impact on taxing entities within the county of land use planning. I'm a fire commissioner here in Timberlake, although I speak here as a private citizen and not as a member of Timberlake Fire District. The actions that the county takes in land use planning profoundly affect the operations of highway districts and fire districts. Timberlake had to deal with a fire in an area of our district which had absolutely insufficient infrastructure to enable us to effectively fight that fire. And I think it's absolutely critical that industrial and commercial development be not only encouraged, but of necessity placed in areas where there are sufficient infrastructure resources to support fire protection. I think it's reasonable to remember that law enforcement is a factor in growth. This end of Kootenai County is, speaking for Timberlake, we're seeing in excess of 7% growth presently in terms of the building permits that we're looking at. That means that within 10 years there will be twice as many people living here. The need for an impact fee, frankly, is profound. When we have $11 million worth of new construction in Timberlake, that provides us with nearly $39,000 in new money. And for comparison purposes, that's approximately a 50-unit subdivision. So we got a new 50-unit subdivision, and that seems wonderful for everybody. Gosh, isn't the world advancing? But we get insufficient funds to hire a single firefighter, and you can't even begin to touch a piece of equipment or a fire station, not to mention all of those things with $39,000. So we're really being pressed hard. We've recently gone out for a levy, and among the things that we had to tell our constituents is, well, one of the reasons we need more money is because of all of this growth. Well, frankly, gentlemen, ladies, that's really not a very popular excuse for having to profoundly raise people's property taxes. encourage you to remember that the concept of general welfare should include recognition that the future will be of much longer duration, profoundly longer duration, than the present ownership of any piece of property. And therefore, the overall public goal cited in element E, or land use, should have a very high priority in the preservation of general welfare as a concept. That would be under element A, property rights. Element C, school facilities and transportation. I would really encourage you to include provisions for highway districts within that element, recognizing that unless this is done, the cost of road upgrades required by developments will fall on everyone, and it's generally recognized that growth should pay for itself. I think that's not a controversial concept within our county, within our area. People hope to have the people that are coming here share in the cost of the additional expenses that they're imposing on all of us. Under element D, economic development, on proposed policies 1, I would like to suggest that the first item read direct commercial and industrial uses where urban services are available rather than encourage. And I would like, under item 4, to suggest that we develop regulations for home-based businesses rather than suggestions that it only be done if it somehow is deemed warranted. Item E, land use. Item 2, element E, land use, excuse me. Item 2, again, I would suggest that it read establish regulations and procedures to require that developments of certain size demonstrate adequate water sufficiency. I think that there are sufficient examples presently within the county of problems among neighboring landowners related to this issue that it is beyond being warranted. I would like in number 3 to suggest that it read ensure development has or can have adequate infrastructure and that the costs are recovered from the developer. Under item 5, I would like to suggest that it require landowners and developers to reduce the risks of wildfires to individual structures, communities, and areas of the unincorporated county by creating fire protection regulations. I would like to suggest that 6 might read ensure that development will bear its proportionate share of public infrastructure costs, including water, wastewater, stormwater, roads, as well as law enforcement and fire protection. Objective 5 under element E, which is commercial development. Again, item 1 under proposed policies, I would suggest that it not read encourage, but perhaps read allow limited commercial development only when it complements and preserves rural character and primarily serves the local rural community. And number 2 might read establish regulations for home-based businesses and cottage industries in the rural county. Under element G, hazardous areas, proposed policies, item number 2, I would suggest that we consider more direct language related to fire danger. That might be develop and or maintain regulations which promote public health and safety and protect public and private property and resources in identified floodplains, geologically unstable areas, wildfire-prone areas, and other hazardous areas. Element M, it doesn't appear that this section really seeks to prioritize local resident input effectively and appears that it may possibly just create a process that doesn't really have any doesn't have any requirement that the public input be taken into consideration. The agencies, I've lived in this country for nearly 40 years now. When I came into the country, it was a very rural place, and the prospect of any kind of growth or development was profoundly welcome and dearly hoped for. We're in the 21st century now, not in the middle of the 20th century. We've finally recovered from the fire that ravaged this landscape in 1910. It took nearly 100 years for us to recover from that. And while that seems inconceivable, you can read articles in the Sacramento Bee today about the process and the struggle that they're having in Paradise, California. When everything in a whole region turns black, what do you suppose happens to the property tax revenues from that area? They go to zero. Well, that's what happened here. We're getting back on our feet, but it's the 21st century. 15 times as much landscape is burning during a fire season nowadays relative to merely a decade ago. Fire is a very real threat to this region, this area. Many people, those living in Coeur d'Alene, for example, think of that as a rural problem, but communities like Redding, California, Santa Rosa, California, have proven that that's really not the case. So we need to take the threat of fire seriously, and I think we need to advance awareness of that in our land use planning and in our county policies. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Who would like to be next?
I have a lot of questions. Does anyone want to go ahead of me? I have like 30 questions. I don't want to hog time if someone wants to be shorter. You want to be shorter?
Oh, I'd be really short.
Okay.
I have lots to, but I really have a lot.
Well, maybe you'll answer some of mine. I can shorten mine.
What do you want? My name's Alan John, I live off of Blackstone in Athol. I read this, and I had problems with a couple of things. Page 1. At the very bottom, under property rights, this is proposed policies. Determine public outlet on property rights. Not a good thing. We should determine our property rights based on the Constitution and our founding fathers. I'm sorry, not the public comment on property rights. You can go to a biblical property rights, but let's go to our state constitution and the federal constitution is where we should look for the property rights. Because under Article 1, Section 1 of Idaho's Constitution is our rights for property, not the public. The other one was on page 4. I talked to John about this. Is cottage food industry. The state doesn't regulate it. The county shouldn't even look at regulating cottage food. They can regulate themselves in a manner of if they sell at the farmer's market or they sell on a roadside stand, they can regulate themselves. But I have other things about this, I write, but those are the two big ones for me. The big one is property rights. Thanks.
Alan, could you sign?
Oh, I guess I'll do that too. Sorry.
You got one back here. Oh, you want to come on up?
Sure.
Please, thank you.
Is this where you want us to stand? Because it's kind of hard to see where everybody's at.
Just like, so it picks up on the microphone.
Oh, that's fine. So I'm Renata Moon. I'm a resident here, grew up in North Idaho. I'm not someone who gets into environmental statements or actions very often, but I've been quite worried about the silicon smelter up in Newport. Have you all heard about what's happening there?
The what?
The silicon smelter that they're trying to put in. This is a huge, heavy industry that they're trying to bring in to, I realize it's a different county than this, but what I'd like to see us do is really shore up the part about natural resources and our rural clean air lifestyle here. I work as a physician, I'm actually a pediatrician, so most of the time I spend my day seeing patients and I don't really worry about what laws there are other than following them. Don't worry. But I do want to see what we leave for our kids to be a healthy environment. And I really think we need to shore this up better. So what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing that people from outside the area are much more interested in coming here where we have clean air, relatively clean air, and clean water, and they're interested in building massive factories like that silicon smelter would be. They're terribly polluting. They're not something that we want here for our rural lifestyles. And I would suggest that we look very closely at what we've listed in this policy and make sure that we're really shored up to protecting this for future generations. And by this, I mean our home. Okay.
Summer, could you?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I thought you were done. I just wanted you to spell your last name.
No, I wanted to add that we recently, my family and I recently traveled to China. And I'm curious, with a show of hands, how many people here have been to China? And I don't know, maybe you don't agree with me, but I would say that the trip we had was looking into a horrible future. It is so polluted in China. We got off that plane and you can taste the plastic, literally taste it in the back of your throat as you get off and breathe. And I thought to myself, what have I brought my kids into? Like, we didn't even have face masks, but you know, we were there for a week. We cannot afford to let huge industry come into this area, and we've got to realize that they're looking at areas like this, they're looking at it with interest because they want to get access to the water and the cleaner air, and we've got to shore ourselves up for that potential. So I would encourage us to really enhance this in terms of the natural resources and clean air. Thank you. My last name is Moon.
Moon, okay.
Thank you.